The Trade Desk's SVP of the Ventura TV Operating System, Matthew Henick, joins us for a deep dive into Ventura's competitive positioning and advantages, key challenges, and goals. Listen on.
Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Stream. This is Will Richmond and from Video News, and that was Colin Dixon there at the top. Hey Colin, how is everything?
It's great, Will, and I'm really excited today because we have Matthew Henick, who's Senior Vice President of the Ventura TV Operating System at the Trade Desk, with us today. Hey Matthew.
How are you?
Hi Matthew.
I'm great, and I'm really pumped to have you here, Matthew, because I'm sure a lot of people have heard about Ventura and he's excited to hear a lot more about it. You are going to be the latest entrant in the TV OS race, and we want to hear lots more. So why don't we just dive right in? Tell us about the Trade Desk and tell us about why the Trade Desk is bringing a new TV OS.
Sure. So the Trade Desk is an ad tech company. It's been around for over 15 years, and its mission from day one is to help its advertising clients compete in the marketplace of ideas. And the marketplace of ideas for us is the premium open internet. So the majority of the internet, frankly, it's not controlled and restricted by Google and Facebook. And so when we work with an advertising client, we're able to look them in the eye and tell them that we are putting their ad dollars in the best possible place for their business. Increasingly over time, that has been in the connected television space. The connected television ad space is an amazing ad product. It's amongst some of the best content humanity has ever made. Number one, in movies and television and sports and news. Number two, it's highly authenticated because you're often logging in to your streaming apps. And number three, it's highly immersive because it's on these large screens on your wall. And so as we've been stewarding our advertising clients' dollars more frequently into the connected TV space, we've taken a great interest in understanding it from end to end. And we have some concerns. We have some concerns about the transparency and fairness of the ad supply chain. So if an advertising client wants to spend $1, how much of that dollar is actually going to the content publisher who had made the investments to make that? And increasingly, more and more of that is going to intermediaries who are taxing it along the way. And because of that, that leads to a pretty suboptimal publisher experience where they're not able to monetize their content enough. And most importantly, a suboptimal user experience where it's not an objective experience for you anymore as a user, where you can't really trust what's happening on the screen. And so traditionally, the power to change these things have sat at the operating system level, right? We've seen that happen in desktop computing with Microsoft and Windows. We've seen this in mobile with Apple and Google. And while as a user, I've enjoyed a lot of those platforms, I think we've learned in retrospect that you can't always trust the incentives of those big tech platforms when they control everything at the operating system level. And so we're throwing our hat in the ring and more to help build an operating system for television that is more fair and more transparent and can drive value for everyone from the people making television to the people selling it, the people making content for it, advertising on it, and ultimately putting it on their living room wall.
Thanks for sharing all that, Matthew. And I think we're going to want to dive into more of the details related to each of the points you just made. But let's just step back for a second and just, I think our listeners will be familiar with the Trade Desk, and certainly you guys have become a huge player in the DSP world. But just start by understanding, why is building a TV OS strategic for the Trade Desk? Never mind what the advantages might be to the various constituencies. Why is it strategic for the core DSP business for the Trade Desk?
So our specialties over the past 15 years have been obviously advertising, of which the CTV ecosystem, I think, inevitably was going to embrace more than they did at the outset, right? We went through this stage of you were able to announce, and they always should have, announced their direct-to-consumer strategies, and your stock would go up. And then you would announce your new subscription numbers, and your stock would go up. And then all of a sudden, people started to ask the question of, okay, great, you have those subscribers, how much money you're making? And then sometimes the line would go dead, I think. And that was mainly because a lot of these media companies, understandably, were so focused on serving the consumer in a way that, frankly, just the business didn't scale with usage, right? You were in a position where you can watch Disney Plus for an hour a month or 1,000 hours a month, and you were spending the exact same amount of money, which frankly is a cardinal sin of the media industry. You need to have a relationship between how much your audience loves your content and how much money you make, and that sometimes it's a proxy for time spent, and then into advertising. Sometimes that's merch, sometimes it's theme parks. It's all those types of things, and so after the past few years, we've seen everybody come around to this. And again, it's not surprising. Our founder, Jeff Green, has been saying Netflix would carry ads for, I think, for a decade at this point. And so we've reached a tipping point now where we've started to meet up with them, right? And again, we're able to steer advertising dollars in, and we're able to forge really deep and great partnerships with most media companies to secure their inventory to bring them demand. So number one, that's our world. We know that world well. We're one of the leaders in it. Number two, we're a software company, and we're really good at creating scaled, large software platforms. And so when we put those two things together, it's an operating system at large scale that helps build, what we believe will be the best ad ecosystem in the history of television, which we don't take lightly because television has always been an advertising medium.
Yeah. So this is a very cluttered space. Lots of TVOS providers in there. And I want to delve a little bit more into the pain points that you see in the ecosystem. It's obviously there are many participants here in the ecosystem. There's viewers, advertisers, content providers, OEMs, tech providers. Why don't you take a moment to just talk a little bit about those pain points that you see in the ecosystem with all of those participants that you're really looking to address with Ventura?
Yeah, just to highlight the couple big ones. It starts at the beginning. It starts with the manufacturing of a television. You have these OEM, these original equipment manufacturers who are deciding to make televisions and figure out whether or not they make money doing it. And that's become incredibly difficult, even before tariffs, where when you're making a television, you're looking at every component part and trying to reduce your cost there because your margins are low single digits, if not negative in certain cases. And so that has forced OEMs and the retailers who are putting those televisions on their shelves to look for other ways to increase that margin. And that's increasingly brought them into the advertising and content space because that is the value that's being created by putting these televisions in the living rooms, which wouldn't happen if you didn't manufacture them and you didn't put them on your store shelves first. So when you do that, when you decide to start building an ad and content business, you really have two choices because you need to obviously build a service or have your users be exposed to it, which brings you back to the operating system because that usually is the biggest lever in controlling that. And you have two choices there. You can build your own operating system and build your own content service and build your own ad team. That is not necessarily those television manufacturers' specialties. It's also incredibly expensive, and it's an always-on cost for the rest of the time. Or you can choose to take a free OS, or sometimes you get paid a small one-time bounty by taking the OS that's basically pre-baked from an Amazon or a Google. And in that case, again, tale as old as time, but you're handing over your customer relationship to them and just hoping that their incentives stay vaguely aligned with yours. And so that's that pain point for the manufacturers. They're looking to build a sustainable recurring revenue model that is centered around televisions, but they've increasingly not been able to participate in the value that these televisions are creating. And so we think Ventura is that third option where we can present to them an operating system and a solution that they can build. We can help them build an advertising business because that's our specialty. And we can build something where they can not just make a few dollars once every 7 years that television is sold and then scrapped and then someone buys a new one, but they can ring the cash register every month for the life of that television because that's what the operating system was doing. I think the other major pain point we're seeing is for publishers. Publishers want to lean more and more into programmatic advertising because they've seen that and it's proven to be the best, most optimal way to monetize their content. But it's incredibly hard for them to navigate this supply chain. In many cases, one ad that fires on a streaming app can go out through over 100 different paths, and we will see it almost 100 different times, even though it's one ad opportunity. And they want to make sure that when somebody buys that ad, number one, they're getting the best possible price, and number two, most of that dollar is going back to the publisher. So that's something that obviously we've cared about from year one of the trade desk, but we think we have a lot more leverage over with an OS. Additionally, those publishers are increasingly looking over their shoulder because the operating system that they are relying on to distribute their app is now their competitor, because every major operating system in the US has their own and operated content service. So now if you're a Disney or a Paramount, you are hoping that Amazon's going to give you a fair shake over Prime Video, or Google's going to give you a fair shake over YouTube, and that's increasingly not panning out in the publisher's favor. And then finally, for advertisers want to spend more on this amazing content, but they're having trouble navigating the increasingly fragmented landscape of, again, how do they most efficiently spend that dollar with Disney? How do they make sure that there's not 3 or 4 partners in between them committing that dollar who are also taxing it? All of that leads to a pretty bad user experience at the end of the day. And so, for better or worse, all those pain points are related, but we're mainly starting with the OEMs and then working our way down the supply chain.
I want to ask you more about the OEMs and also the publishers, Matthew. I'm sorry to take us one step backwards before we go 2 steps forward, but I did just want to circle back to the question I asked before about why this is strategic for the DSP side of the trade desk, which of course is the main revenue and profitability engine. What I heard you say was kind of a very fair description of the media business, which I think we can all concur has been challenged on the revenue side with the subscription package model, and is now recognizing the relationship between usage, viewership, and revenue. So we all understand that. I think we all definitely understand the trade desk's capability of building scaled software. I don't think anybody questions that. I'm not sure I heard the answer, though, about, again, what is strategic to the trade desk about, to the DSP side of the business about now rolling out an OS. Sorry to ask you to put a fine point on that, but I just wasn't sure I totally understood the answer.
Happy to. So on behalf of our advertising clients, we look at over 17 million ad opportunities a second on the internet, right? So if we're stewarding money for Procter & Gamble or Nike or Coca-Cola, at every second we're looking over 17 million different opportunities. A large portion of those are in CTV. The more confidently we can assess those opportunities and the more confidently we can bid on them, the better we can do in terms of helping drive our advertising clients' business. And when that happens, we make money. And so we want to make sure that the CTV ad ecosystem is as transparent as possible and as fair as possible, so that we can bid more often and bid, frankly, higher in some cases when we know this is the absolute best 2,000 impressions that are firing on CTV in this second for Procter & Gamble, to make sure that we're helping their business. When that happens again, we usually win our fair share, and the DSP business, to your point, gets to grow, and that's why we think an operating system is so important.
And you've concluded that an operating system is really having the operating system is really the only way to have that level of visibility and transparency to achieve the objective that you just said.
It's not the only way. We've had a lot of success with our products like OpenPath, which directly connect advertisers and publishers so they can transact in a one-to-one way. But the operating system is a way to basically compound and bring together all of the things that we have been putting into the market with success to do these things. OpenPath on the supply chain, UAD2 in terms of building a safe identity layer for CTV, OpenPass, which is our single sign-on service to make it easier to sign into all of your apps at the same time. The operating system, as I mentioned before, is just the place of the most leverage to do that. And we feel that if we're able to bring all those things together in an operating system, it's not one of these things where we're just building for the advertisers. Those are our main constituencies, always will. But the fact that building for the advertiser also leads to a better user experience, gives us confidence that the operating system is the right layer to invest in.
Got it. Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Matthew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your picture there, I think, is really accurate. It's where everything comes together to reach the user with both ads and content. So it definitely is the sort of gatekeeper of the business, if you like, going forward. So why don't we talk a little bit about the sequence of getting Ventura onto TVs? I assume that you're actively looking to license the OS to TV OEMs. How are you differentiating yourselves? What from say a Roku OS or somebody else? How does that work, and how's it going?
So first step is distribution, and we look at a bunch of different segments within that. Certainly OEMs, the people manufacturing the televisions, retailers, so the people selling the televisions. In some cases, those retailers at Best Buy, Walmart, Target, sometimes they have their own in-house brand, right? So they're both a retailer and an OEM. And then operators, cable and satellite operators who are putting hardware into their subscribers' homes. So we see all of them as important and valued partners at this sort of step. And we approach it in a couple of different ways. To your previous point, we know that we're entering a mature market that happens to be dominated by some of the most successful companies in the history of capitalism, in Amazon and Google and Apple to an extent. So we need to make sure that, number one, integrating Ventura is as simple as possible technically. So we are building on the Android open source stack. We are working really closely with every system on a chip manufacturer, every memory manufacturer, every memory board manufacturer, so that bringing Ventura up on your hardware in the factory is just as easy as doing it for Google TV, Roku, or Fire TV, or pick your OS of choice. So we wanted to get overall speed bumps there. And then we look at it as being a partner who is willing to spend the care and the effort to actually understand each one of those segments and each one of those partners within those segments' businesses. Some OEMs are global one category shops. They only make televisions. And so what their business needs are and how they want to interact with their customers long term is different than a OEM that makes a portfolio of consumer electronics or trying to build a smart home. There's some retailers, as I mentioned, who have their own in-house brand. There's some who are just really trying to build a retail media network, and televisions can be a step that way. And so we've built both our product to be customizable there in terms of integrating with retailers' loyalty programs, in terms of integrating to any of retail media networks that they have. We've also built it to be customizable from a branding perspective. We're not goaling ourselves on how recognizable is the Ventura brand. If a retailer and OEM wants to brand it a different way with a different name, if they want to change the colors, if they want to integrate their logos, we're happy to do that as well. And then finally, and frankly, in a lot of cases, most importantly, we have the most flexible business model where we take all of the revenue that is generated by the platform, your take of ad revenue or ad inventory from all of the publishers, your commissions on subscriptions that originate, your commissions on transactions, rentals, and purchases. We put that in a bucket and we basically give all of that back to the OEM. And that's something that most OEMs haven't been able to participate in, but also retailers as well. And so we've tried to be really clear and responsive to each distributor's business model of how can we, again, shift them to a place where they can own their future, they can own their customer relationships through the life of that television, but they could also have a recurring monthly revenue line based on the value that the television that they created is actually generating.
So how are the discussions going with the various constituencies you're targeting for distribution? And can you say more about the timing of the rollout of Ventura?
Yeah, the conversations are going incredibly well, and I think they're very refreshing for both sides because I don't blame them for being slightly nervous about them. Even to your question of what's in it for us, we spend a lot of time to really understand how our business works so they can understand why we're being, frankly, more generous than in every other platform, because they've been in situations where an OS that perhaps they started working with 10 years ago, 5 years ago, said, we will never get into content, don't worry, and then they're into content. That same OS may have said, we're never going to make televisions, we're never going to compete with you, and then they're making televisions. And so I and we just want to make sure that they understand why we're in this business and what our principles are. One of the core principles of the trade desk is objectivity. And this comes from our DSP business. When we work with advertising clients, we want to always be able to look them in the eye and say, we're putting your dollars in the best place for you, not necessarily for us, because we only win when you do. That is very different than some of the other DSPs or some of the other ad offerings, right? Just to pick one with Google, when you spend with Google, 90% of your dollars are going to YouTube. So if you want to buy YouTube, you should buy from Google. If you want to buy elsewhere on the open internet, you should not. Same thing with Amazon and Prime Video. So we spend a lot of time with the OEMs, with the retailers, explaining that principle and explaining how our business works so they can trust us long term. So we'll have some announcements soon. Part of being a good partner, I think, is allowing them to control the timing of it. I don't take for granted how hard it is to make televisions, to put them on shelves and then get them into people's living rooms. So we'll work with them to figure out the best timing to make those announcements.
Great. I want to follow up a little bit something. You were talking about how favorable you're going to be versus the other TV OSs towards the OEMs. What about the content providers? Are they going to be better off on Ventura than other TV OSs? And secondarily, is it going to be really tough to get an app on Ventura for them?
Absolutely, it'll be more valuable to them. And when we know this, both, to the previous question of the tests we've done around our products like OpenPath and other supply chain optimizations. So our goal is that an ad that fires on a Ventura-powered device is more valuable to a publisher, both monetarily and probably for data reasons and otherwise. So that we feel really confident in, and that we know the publishers are excited about. It will not be difficult technically for them to get their app onto Ventura. We have our own app store. It will be open, but because it's built on Android open source, every publisher already has an app that works day one on our platform. So we're not going into there asking them to do a ton of code revisions or certainly creating an app from scratch. It starts with the drag and drop, and then we can make modifications from there as they and we see fit. So technically not a problem. And then commercially, we're in a really fortunate state is that we're so grateful that we have deep relationships with these publishers already because they're inventory partners with us for our core business. And so they are rooting for us. They recognize the challenges as well, and they're willing to support us and our mission because, again, they don't want to feel like they're competing perhaps at a disadvantage against the operating system that they're relying on. They have increasingly found that the data that they've shared with their OSs in the past has been used against them. Perhaps they even frankly bid directly against them on sports, on certain other media rights, and they know with us that'll never be an issue. So we have a real deep and willing partner in the publishers, but it's on us obviously to drive that distribution for them.
I hate to keep going one step back to take two steps forward, Matthew, but I just want to quickly follow up on the distribution dynamics for a moment. When you talk about conversations going incredibly well with the OEMs and the retailers, can you just explain, do you see this as kind of a fixed pie type of situation where a partner that you'd be talking to would have to, is in a position then where they'd have to essentially replace an existing OS that they're using with Ventura, at least for part of their model lineup? Or do you see in some way an expansion of the pie where they may maintain their existing OS relationships, but now add Ventura to some additional models that they're introducing?
To the point on being responsive to each partner separately, like I really think it's going to depend on the partner, right? There's about 50 million television sold in the US, I think, per year. You should correct me. It'd be helpful if you did. And I don't, see some big step change in that over the next couple of years. If anything, the televisions are getting better made and either cheaper, so they're more replaceable, or better made that they'll last longer, and maybe it'll cancel out. So some partners we're talking to have one OS and they have an exclusive relationship, right? And traditionally those OEMs have been paid a bounty for that, and they've been doing the math of saying, oh wow, cool, they paid us $15 once, but now in their earnings report we've seen that they make $50 a year from that television. So where is that delta going over the 6 years that television was around? So those are really interesting conversations where they are trying to keep things simple, have one OS, and swap it out going forward. There's other OEMs who do take a portfolio approach where they have three, four, or five OSs. Um, some of that is completely determined by the retailer leverage who are demanding that they do that. In other cases, because it's technically easy, they do so. And in that case, we're willing to work with those partners too. And we think over time we'll prove out that the percentage of their portfolio that carry Ventura will be more valuable for them too. It's just math at that point. Outside of that, there's a lot of, since we've been public since November of last year, we get a lot of really interesting inbound from folks who haven't necessarily been in the television space in the US or at all. Really interesting opportunities in the hospitality space, right? You think about hotels now trying to build their own ad networks. You think about from a guest standpoint, being able to check in a hotel, log in once, and feel like you're sitting in front of your living room so that you can pick up, in the middle of episode 3 where you left before you had to rush out to catch your plane. Planes are also interesting as obviously there's more seat back investment there, in-store stuff. So I think there's an expansion in terms of the scope that we're interested in, again, because of our focus on advertising, where you've seen other established OSs pull back. Suddenly, Google TV has changed their approach where in hospitality, where now they're charging per room, I believe, for deployments there, which I'd imagine hotels don't like. So there's a lot of interesting things that I think will be open for us because of what we care about versus not necessarily being an opportunity that the other OSs are chasing.
Let's dive in a little bit about the fast issue. Pretty much every TV OS now has a built-in fast. You say you're not going to own one. I think that's an important component, that the TV OS, when somebody buys a TV, that there's content immediately available. So how are you working with OEMs to do that, to fill that need?
You're right. This is an incredibly important distinction for us, and an incredibly important example of our principle of objectivity, right? So there are certain OEMs who have a fast service that we're happy to accommodate. It's already up and running. They're most likely already a partner of ours on the DSP, and we can make sure that that's able to run just fine, and they get the same privileges they may have had on their other OS or their in-house OS in other cases. In other instances, we're working with OEMs who want to have a fast service, but again, in some cases, very smartly, didn't want to build out their own content service team, their own ad sales team. And so we have a collection of partners that are willing to work directly with those OEMs, either to white label their service or to co-brand it, or just to have preferential commercial relationships so that those OEMs can still participate in that revenue, but the OEMs don't need to stand one up from scratch.
Following up on that a bit also, talking about another constituency, certainly potentially the most important constituency, which is the viewers who make their decisions every day. Which OS, which TV, which content service, which ads, no ads, etc. Any research that the Trade Desk has done on how viewers think about these OSs and their current experiences that have provided insights about Ventura's development?
Sure. I mean, the first highest level one is that when you're purchasing a television, you don't usually care about the OS at all. You care about price and screen size, right? And so I think that is just as much of a sort of statement on the state of OSs and how user hostile they've been, versus also, OSs not necessarily being built for the user, which is crazy to me. The second is that our research shows that when you turn on your television, about 70% of the time, you know what you're going to watch, you know what you're looking for. And that's a really important statistic to us because we know that these OSs are not trying to give that to you first. They're trying to get you to do something else, which is most likely click on the fast service that they own or the MVPD that they own or whatnot. You look at the carousels of some of these OSs, and they'll have 5 slots, and 3 out of 5 of them are ads for their services that aren't even targeted to you. So you turned on your television to watch this particular sporting event, and you need to basically machete through a bunch of weeds to finally find it. We think being objective allows us to chase that and provide that like nobody else can. And so, one of our KPIs that we look at is, how quick is the gap between the power button and the play button? How quickly do we get you to what you want to watch? Because that gets you into the publisher's content, which then hopefully gets you into an ad experience, which means, everybody starts to win and the money starts to flow. And so that's the most important research for us, is that, people right now are not opinionated about their OS, and we think that's because OSs have not really been catering to them. And number two, that people want their OS to give them exactly what they're saying they want, and you shouldn't try and convince them otherwise. I think there is an opportunity in that 30% where you don't know what you want to watch, again, to bring objectivity around personalization, to be a little bit more discreet on profiles, to understand who's actually watching. Is the kid in the family? Is it the adult? Obviously, what you would show them would be very different, and there's a lot of headroom there, but we're really focused first on that predominant use case of you turn on your television for a specific reason, and we're not going to try and convince you of anything else.
So I got to ask this, and Will's going to shake his head, I know, but Google TV just lost its place as the primary TV operating system in my house because it started showing me ads for Target and Coke and other branded products in the core OS and in that hero bar right at the top, making me absolutely crazy. Am I going to get the same thing from Ventura?
You will not, for a couple of different reasons. The first issue that I'm hearing from you, but I have a little bit of a bias, is it's not that they were ads, it's that they were untargeted ads. No pun intended, since I guess one of them was a target ad, but they didn't seem very responsive to what you were looking for implicitly or explicitly. And I think that's always the worst experience. Back to my days of working at Facebook and Instagram, we cared about ad relevance above anything, because that changed your whole perception of the product. And I think that's the same thing here. And so to be clear, Trade Desk will never own any of the ad inventory in the apps or ad inventory in the UI. There are certain OEMs who perhaps will want to build some sort of ad product in there, and we will help them facilitate that. But we will insist that it's targeted. We insist that it is constrained. It's not home screen takeovers, all that type of stuff, to make sure that, again, you feel like you own your television. It's a really sort of absurd state that we live in, where you could spend even a couple hundred, but never mind a couple thousands of dollars to put a television on your living room, and you feel like you installed a billboard for somebody else in there. And so that is not what we want. We think the best ads in television happen within the content. They're highly targeted. And to be clear, this isn't an ad load race for us either. We're not trying to load up more and more ads in the shows and television that you're watching. We're just wanting to make sure that they're efficiently placed and targeted, because in that case, you could most likely have less of them, is what we've seen in the tests that we're doing.
So we just have a little bit of time left, but let's see if we can squeeze in a last few questions here, Matthew, because this has been very interesting, a lot of fun. Earlier, we talked about pain points in the various constituencies. I know these things can be hard to compare on a relative basis, but as you think about the different constituencies, which do you think of as having the biggest pain right now? Is it the advertisers? Is it the publishers? Is it the OEMs? Is it the viewers? Who has the biggest pain point right now with the current state of OSs?
To give you a very clean answer, I think it's the OEMs, because that's just a math problem that is existential for them. And I'll put retailers in that same bucket, right? Because if you are selling televisions that are not your own in-house brand, your margins problems are the same as the manufacturers themselves. But if I took one step up of defining the pain point, it really is the fact that no matter who these constituents are, you cannot own your future in CTV anymore. If you're an OEM or a retailer, you're losing that customer connection. If you're a retailer and you're putting Fire TV televisions in the home of your customers, how likely is that customer to come back into your store 5 years later to buy that television, 5 weeks later to buy the next video game, if you just put the world's largest retailer in there? If you're an advertiser, you want to be able to know who your customer sets are. You want to know how to reach them. You want to effectively invest in your business. And all of this just comes down to not mortgaging your future to big tech. And so I think that's the pain point, and everybody knows that. This isn't a surprise anymore, but it's still really, really hard to pull yourself out of that and put yourself on solid ground. Obviously, continue to run your public or your private company and build a sustainable revenue line.
Well, I'm going to ask the second to last question. I'll let Will ask the softball question about the future. Tell us which markets Ventura is targeted at. Is it just going to be in the US to start, or will you be in Europe too?
Our plan is a US first rollout. Some of the partners that we're working with are naturally global, just by nature, and so that will help determine where else we move. But the Trade Desk is a global company, so we expect to expand globally over time.
Great. Okay, so I'm actually going to ask two questions, so I will ask the second to last question also, Colin, just to be clear. First one's I wouldn't classify as a softball. It's more of this is your read my lips moment, Matthew. Are we hearing you to say that we will not see from the Trade Desk a content service, we will not see a Trade Desk branded television, and we will also not see a Trade Desk NewFront at some point in the future? No.
No.
All right.
My entire career, I tallied it up. I think over my career, I've had the pleasure of deploying over $14 billion in content spend between when I was at Facebook and Epic Games and all those places. I hope to never spend another dollar. And I know I will not in this job. So we will never, ever have a content service. We will never, ever be buying content. We will never, ever be competing with our publisher partners. So going down the line, we will never then be in a situation where we're standing on a stage telling you to buy these shows, because we will never own them. We do not want to make a television. I don't think we ever will. Hardware is not our specialty. I want to give you accurate answers, which is if we're working with an OEM and they want our logo on a television because they think it'll help it sell, the Ventura logo, we'll talk about it, but I really, really do not want to, and I don't think we will.
Okay, your candor has earned you a softball question as the last question, Matthew. The softball question is, look out ahead a year for from Ventura's general availability, and then look out 3 to 5 years. What percentage of the tvOS market would you define as success?
I like that you think this is a softball question, because anytime I think of numbers, I feel like I got to dance a little bit. But the truth of it is, I feel, and we are in a really lucky position, which is we have this history at the Trade Desk of launching new products to not just benefit our business, which obviously is a public company we think about all the time, but how to change the market overall for the better. Because when that happens, we win more than our fair share. And so when we look at things like OpenPath, which is highly related here, when we think of things like UID2, it didn't take those products to be the dominant source in the market to start seeing the changes we want to out in the world. And so that we know that with the introduction, we're already seeing, I think, in some response, other folks change how they're doing business in response to us. And so we don't think it'll take a huge commanding market share in order to start to see more fairness in the ad supply chain. We don't think it'll take a ton of market share to give publishers a little bit more negotiating power with the other OSs to own their inventory, to be able to sell it themselves instead of handing it over. So again, we're not looking at world domination or market domination right now. We're looking at creating the best user experience and getting people to recognize it so they put it in their living room.
And we're also not looking at getting any numbers from you either, right?
I got to the end, right? Softball one way or another.
Well done. You do a very good two-step, Matthew. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise.
A good dance indeed. Matthew, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for coming on. You can sign me up as soon as you're ready. As soon as you've got something to look up, sign me up. I'll be happy to beta and report back to our listeners about the experience. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
We would love that, and thanks for letting me talk it through.
Thanks, Matthew. We really appreciate your time, and best of luck to you guys.
Thank you.
Inside the Stream is a production of In-Screen Media and Video News, all rights reserved.